Welcome to Readers of the Lost Art with your presenter, Dr. Paul Anthony Taylor, a recovering academic. And the title of today's talk is Homer's Odyssey Explained, Book 1, Part 2, Athena Speaks. Hi everybody, and this is a continuation of the reading, of the actual text of the Odyssey. So we've done the first part of Book 1, this is the second part. And I'm just going to preface the actual reading with a few comments comparing and contrasting the Odyssey to the Iliad. And then at the end, because the subtitle of this talk is Athena Speaks, I wanted to explore this notion of what do the gods and goddesses represent in Greek mythology, and in particular in the Odyssey. And to do that, I'll give some further context from people like Plato, who discuss the concept of a daemon or a spirit, which is perceived to be the intermediary between the world of the gods and the world of human beings. And that obviously has relevance to modern times, because what I think is fascinating about the Odyssey and Homer and the Iliad in general is the way in which these literary products, it's the whole ethos of this channel, but these literary epics actually portray subtle ways and nuanced ways of human emotions and how we deal with them and how we deal with notions of fate. And in the comment section of the previous video, that was a general video about the Odyssey that I'd called Imagine No Religion, I was picked up on slightly in the comments because I was accused of having said that the Greek gods are merely projections, which I actually didn't say. I wouldn't say merely. I do think the Greek gods were projections of human concerns. But when you read philosophy of consciousness or mind philosophy, or when you look at cognitive linguistics and cognitive science, there's a large body of writing that says we understand the world around us at quite a profoundly deep cerebral level, the way neuroscience suggests. We understand the world through the medium of metaphors. So literature, I think, in scientific circles is often looked down upon as just some form of entertainment or cultural manifestation, when I actually think literature and its dependence upon metaphors is a brilliant way of portraying how human beings interact in the world and how they relate to a notion of the transcendent. So I would never say that the Greek myths and stories are merely projections. I think they are projections, but I think all human understanding of our position in the world is some type of projection. And likewise, that's not to diminish anyone with religious beliefs. But there are these projections that we have faith in, and we'll see when we look at the dialectic of enlightenment later on in a lot more detail, Adorno and Horkheimer. You can equally see that science and the whole Western instrumental reason approach to the world is also a form of projection, and they argue its roots can actually be seen in the Odyssey itself. But without more ado, I want to get stuck into what makes the appearance of Athena interesting and different to what you've seen in the Iliad. So this is a quote from Wolfgang Kuhlmann. In the Iliad, human beings attain a higher moral worth than the gods. What is essential to the poet is that emotional actions of the gods allow for a rational explanation of fateful events in human life. As frivolous as the gods may appear to us, their actions account for the whole of human suffering and weakness. This explanation is given with great realism, without appealing to an unexplorable numinous power or to sentimental pathos. So Kuhlmann here is describing how in the Iliad at least, the gods are a explanation for, he says here, fateful events in human life. But he also points out the gods often act frivolously, whereas what you find in the Odyssey, and this is what I'm trying to compare and contrast, as he says here, in the Odyssey, things are quite different. In the Odyssey, human reason, Odysseus shows cunning And in this part that we're going to look at today, Telemachus, his son, receives useful advice. You could interpret it as he has intuition, he's growing to manhood, and this is through, it's personified as the intervention of Athena, but actually you could say this is the growing maturity of Telemachus as he then asserts his um, passage into manhood in the household where his father is absent, but he's going to search for him. So this is the big, it's interesting, this is from the Iliad, but it gives you the rationale for why the goddesses are so angry with Paris. And so he kept on raging. So this is Achilles that's being spoken about. And so he kept on raging, shaming noble Hector. But the gods in bliss looked down and pitied Priam's son. They kept on urging the sharp-eyed giant killer Hermes to go and steal the body, a plan that pleased them all, but not Hera, Poseidon, or the girl with blazing eyes. They clung to their deathless hate of sacred Troy, Priam and Priam's people, just as they had at first when Paris, in all his madness, launched the war. He offended Athena and Hera, both goddesses. When they came to his shepherd's fold, he favoured love, who dangled before his eyes the lust that loosed disaster. So Athena and Hera and Aphrodite, so this idea, they clung to their deathless hate of sacred Troy. So Paris chooses Aphrodite in what's known as the Judgment of Paris, which I'll be referring to very shortly. So in the Iliad, you see here, it's right at the end of book 24, you get some type of explanation as to why they're so hateful and vengeful. Whereas you'll see in the following reading of the Odyssey that Athena is much more reasonable. Athena is the goddess of wisdom. The Latin version would be Minerva. And that's how she appears in the Odyssey. Whereas in the Iliad, she's appeared as much more irrational and vindictive. So this is a fresco from Pompeii, which shows you the judgment of Paris. And we'll see in various renditions I think there's plenty of artistic representations of this scene from mythology. I think I found one where they managed to keep their clothes on. But as you can see here, Aphrodite is not shy at coming forward. So this is the beginning of where we left off last time. So the second part of book 1. Ready Telemachus took her up at once. So Telemachus is talking to Athena, who's in the guise of Mentes, purportedly an old friend of Odysseus, the father of Telemachus. So ready Telemachus took her up at once. Well, my friend, seeing you want to probe and press the question, once this house was rich, no doubt, beyond reproach, when the man you mentioned still lived here, at home. So the man you mentioned, in other words, Odysseus, his father, who he's still not using his name. Now the gods have reversed our fortunes with a vengeance, wiped that man from the earth like no one else before. I would never have grieved so much about his death if he'd gone down with comrades off in Troy, or died in the arms of loved ones, once he had wound down the long coil of war. Then all united Achaia would have raised his tomb, and he would have won his son great fame for years to come. But now the whirlwinds have ripped him away, no fame for him. He's lost and gone now, out of sight, out of mind, and he's left me tears and grief. Nor do I rack my heart and grieve him alone, no longer. Now the gods have invented other miseries to plague me. So Telemachus is feeling a bit sorry for himself, it'd be fair to say. And I mentioned it last time, I think I misspoke the name of the concept of renown or fame is kleos. or kleos, the notion of renown amongst your people. And it's interesting, the bits I've emboldened, the whirlwinds have ripped him away, no fame for him, and now the gods have invented other miseries to plague me. So it's, I said Telemachus feeling sorry for himself, but there's a notion almost of the book of Job about this. He feels hard done by the gods as opposed to the book of Job and just monotheistic God. Listen, all the nobles who rule the islands round about, Dulacion and Sami, and wounded Zacynthus too, and all who lord it in rocky Ithaca as well. Down to the last man they caught my mother, and they lay waste my house. And mother, she neither rejects a marriage she despises, nor can she bear to bring the courting to an end, while they continue to bleed my household white. Soon, you wait, they'll grind me down as well. I've emboldened marriage there because it's interesting when Odysseus eventually does come back, there's almost a rekindling of the courtship that led to their marriage. So from memory, I think at one point they sit there without looking at each other quite shyly. And I think there's a ceremonial bath, and there's all these things that are almost a marriage taking place again because they're being reintroduced to each other. And then all the way through, you've got this, the suitors are waiting to gain the hand of Penelope in marriage. So this notion of an illegitimate marriage that the suitors are seeking, and the almost remarriage that is portrayed at the very end when Odysseus does come back, which I'll talk about more when that happens. That's obviously a long way off at this stage. Shameful, brimming with indignation, Pallas Athena broke out. Oh, how much you need Odysseus gone so long, how he'd lay hands on all these brazen suitors. If only he would appear now at his house's outer gates and take his stand, armed with his helmet, shield, and pair of spears, as strong as the man I glimpsed that first time in our own house, drinking wine and revelling there, just come in from Ephyra, visiting Ilus, Mermerus' son. Odysseus sailed that way, you see, in his swift trim ship, hunting deadly poison to smear on his arrows' bronze heads. Ilus refused. He feared the wrath of the everlasting gods. But father, so fond of him, gave him all he wanted. If only that Odysseus sported with these suitors, a blood wedding, a quick death would take the lot. True, but all lies in the lap of the great gods, whether or not he'll come and pay them back here in his own house. So the first emboldened thing, they're hunting deadly poison to smear on his arrows' bronze heads. This is interesting because the Iliad was all about honour and valour in battle, whereas this is, in Greek culture at the time, deemed to be quite sneaky. What, poisoning arrows is not the type of thing an honourable soldier would do. So it's an immediate pointer to the cunning and potentially underhand tactics of Odysseus. And you can see where it says Ilus refused. So it's quite good evidence that at the time this wasn't approved behaviour, poisoning arrows. And then where it says, if only that Odysseus sported with these suitors, a blood wedding, a quick death would take the lot. I think it's book 4, Menelaus, when Telemachus goes to visit him to find out about his father, Menelaus says almost, I think, exactly the same words. So periodically throughout the whole 24 books, there are these almost like verbal placeholders that resonate throughout the whole piece. But you, I urge you, think how to drive these suitors from your halls. Come now, listen closely, take my words to heart. At daybreak, summon the island's lords to full assembly. Give your orders to all and call the gods to witness. Tell the suitors to scatter, each to his own place. As for your mother, if the spirit moves her to marry, let her go back to her father's house, a man of power. Her kin will arrange the wedding, provide the gifts, the array that goes with a daughter dearly loved. in reverse order, that last bit, the array that goes with the daughter dearly loved, and the idea that Telemachus should tell his mother Penelope to go back to her father's house, that's contradicted, you'll see in the next paragraph. So it's slightly odd. The notion earlier of the full assembly, that the idea, and this is what's different to the Iliad. Here, Athena is advising, basically, a bit like Keir Starmer, follow due process. Have the full assembly so that the gods can witness you've warned the suitors. So if they then don't heed your warning, the idea is that justice will ensue. And this is much more contractual almost in the Odyssey. If you're given fair warning and you don't take appropriate steps, then you can't complain if you then suffer punishment. Whereas in the Iliad, everything's a lot more arbitrary. And there are disputes among scholars. I've looked into this because one line of argument is the Odyssey represents a more contractual attitude to government, as you can see here, the full assembly. Whereas the Iliad is much more honour and warrior based. There are some scholars who argue this is a development over time. Therefore, the Odyssey reflects that development towards the more city-state type environment and less of the clan-based warrior. I've seen other articles argue that the two different interpretations of the gods based upon justice and the gods based upon arbitrary power, they coexisted, and it was just part of the tension and the ambivalence of how the Greeks saw the gods. For you, I have some good advice, if only you will accept it. Fit out a ship with 20 oars, the best in sight. Sail in quest of news of your long-lost father. Someone may tell you something, or you may catch a rumour straight from Zeus. Rumour that carries news to men like nothing else. First go down to Pylos, question old King Nestor, then cross over to Sparta, to red-haired Menelaus. Of all the bronze-armoured Achaeans, the last man back. Now if you hear your father's alive and heading home, hard-pressed as you are, brave out one more year. If you hear he's dead, no longer among the living, then back you come to the native land you love, raise his grave mound, build his honours high, with the full funeral rites that he deserves, and give your mother to another husband. See that last bit I've emboldened, that contradicts the previous bit where he was already being told to tell your mother to go to her father's house. This assumes that she hasn't done that and she hasn't been married off. So it's slightly contradictory. Then, once you've sealed those matters, seen them through, think hard, reach down deep in your heart and soul for a way to kill these suitors in your house, by stealth or in open combat. You must not cling to your boyhood any longer. It's time you're a man. Haven't you heard what glory Prince Orestes won throughout the world when he killed that cunning, murderous Odysseus who killed his famous father? And you, my friend, how tall and handsome I see you now. Be brave, you too, so men to come will sing your praises down the years. But now I must go back to my swift trim ship and all my shipmates chafing there. I'm sure waiting for my return. It all rests with you. Take my words to heart. So you can see how there are various layers to this, and there's a hint of Hamlet, or if prefigures Hamlet, in the sense that someone's giving him the comparison of Prince Orestes, who avenged his father, Agamemnon. And it's time you're a man. So it's all about this. Athena can be seen as either the supernatural being giving advice to Telemachus, and this is where I just think it's interesting from a modern perspective, and I appreciate this is from a modern perspective, but I would reiterate, I don't think you can pretend to look at these things totally as a contemporary of the time. But if you think as Athena as the interior monologue of Telemachus, his growing sense of intuition, his growing sense of maturity, then this also all makes sense. It's he's realizing he needs to avenge his father against the suitors. The comment, it all rests with you. There's this growing realization that's personified in Athena, this idea that he has to start taking responsibility. I suppose the colloquial phrase would be grow a pair. Well, he's grown a pair because he's getting into manhood, and this is why everything comes to the crunch. O stranger, heedful Telemachus replied, indeed I will. You've counselled me with so much kindness now, like a father to a son. I won't forget a word. But come, stay longer, keen as you are to sail, so you can bathe and rest and lift your spirits. Then go back to your ship, delighted with a gift, a prize of honour, something rare and fine as a keepsake from myself. The kind of gift a host will give a stranger, friend to friend. Her eyes glinting, Pallas declined in haste. Not now. Don't hold me here. I long to be on my way. As for the gift, whatever you'd give in kindness, save it for my return so I can take it home. Choose something rare and fine, and a good reward that gift is going to bring you. So like a father to a son is an obvious intimation of the absent father, Odysseus. That's the guidance that Telemachus is currently lacking. And it is interesting, as far off as 2,500 years ago, absent fatherhood is still a social issue. The kind of gift a host will give a stranger, friend to friends. This points to the fact that Telemachus is very observant of custom. He's very obedient to what should be done. And this also goes to explain why Athena is so keen to help him, because Telemachus is obedient and he is loyal to the customs of the time. Don't hold me here, I long to be on my way. That's a mirror image of what's happening to Odysseus, is being held by Calypso on the island. So there's allusions to what happens later on. You can see them in the text already. And then a good reward that gift is going to bring you. My point I made earlier about the Odyssey is a lot more transactional. People tend to get what they deserve, or they avoid punishment because they followed the rules. This isn't what tends to happen in the Iliad. With that promise, off and away, Athena, the bright-eyed goddess, flew like a bird in soaring flight, but left his spirit filled with nerve and courage, charged with his father's memory more than ever now. He felt his senses quicken, overwhelmed with wonder. This was a god, he knew it well, and made at once for the suitors, a man like a god himself. Amidst them still the famous bard sang on, and they sat in silence listening as he performed the Achaeans' journey home from Troy. All the blows Athena doomed them to endure. So this idea that, again, I want to recognise that the Greeks may have believed, and we'll get onto this in future, the extent to which the Greeks did believe or had varying levels of belief in their gods. It can be seen as a multi-layered issue. But the way in which but left his spirit filled with nerve and courage. So whether you call it projection, whether you call it displacement, sublimation, you can apply modern, contemporary, anachronistic, psychological terms. But I'm just pointing here to how the ancient Greeks encapsulated what modern contemporary people would just term a different way. But arguably the essence, the emotional processes that are going on are age-old, perennial. They never really change. So we all get inspiration from various different sources. We all have varying degrees of confidence or courage. And this is the Greek way of understanding it. He's had his courage reinforced, and he's had his memory of his father charged, it says. And it's applied to the idea the minute, and this is a trope, the idea that gods disappeared. So Athena's known for disappearing like a bird in soaring flight. And then the reference to the Achaeans' journey home from Troy. I think the story was there's a Greek warrior, Gyas, and he assaulted a Trojan prophetess, Cassandra. She was seeking refuge at the statue of Athena, and he assaulted her. So that's why Athena has it in for them. And this also, it's like Orestes is a background story that's a parallel to what Telemachus is being asked to do, avenge the potential death of his father. He doesn't quite know what's happened yet. But here's another parallel, the Achaeans' journey home, which Athena is punishing them. And what you see is Athena is she's much more orientated to helping Telemachus because he follows the rules. He's shown a guest good hospitality. And she also feels, we'll see later on as the story progresses, Odysseus has followed the rules according to the gods. He doesn't, for example, eat the cattle of the sun god like his men do. And now, from high above in her room and deep in thought, she caught his inspired strains. Icarius's daughter Penelope, wary and reserved, and down the steep stair from her chamber she descended, not alone. Two of her women followed close behind. That radiant woman, once she reached her suitors, drawing her glistening veil across her cheeks, paused now where a column propped the sturdy roof, with one of her loyal handmaids stationed either side. Suddenly, dissolving in tears and bursting through the bard's inspired voice, she cried out, "Phemius! So many other songs you know to hold us spellbound, works of the gods and men that singers celebrate. Sing one of those as you sit beside them here, and they drink their wine in silence. But break off this song, the unendurable song that always rends the heart inside me. The unforgettable grief, it wounds me most of all. How I long for my husband, alive in memory always, that great man whose fame resounds through Hellas, right to the depths of Argos. Why, mother, poised Telemachus put in sharply, why deny our devoted bard the chance to entertain us? Anyway, the spirit stirs him on. Bards are not to blame. So why deny our devoted bard the chance to entertain us? Anyway, the spirit stirs him on. The bards are not to blame. Which also strikes me as a perennial issue about the role of art. So this, people are listening to an epic tale told by a singer. In other words, the reader of the story. And it's multi-layered here because Penelope is objecting because she's upset because it reminds her of too much. And there's arguably two elements to Telemachus's reply. One is he's beginning to assert his authority and his manhood by telling his mother what she should be doing. And she can tell she's slightly shocked by this, we'll see. But that's him beginning to assert himself. There's also the potential he's just trying to protect her from the suitors. So he'll tell her just to basically butt out and go back to her room. That could be, it could be both simultaneously, to multiple motivations. One, to protect his mother from the suitors, to get her out the way. B, to assert his manhood. And C, this idea that he's also defending, again, it's his tendency to always defend custom and tradition and what he thinks is the accepted way of doing things. And he's pointing out it's not the devoted bard's chance. The bard any way the spirit stirs him on. The bard receives the influence of the muses, and you can't dictate to the bard what he's supposed to sing. Bards are not to blame. But this, I said, is perennial. This goes on. I'm thinking of Oscar Wilde when he said words to the effect of, "There's no such thing as a moral or moral art. It's either good or bad." So don't blame the bard. There is a autonomy and value to art that is beyond subjective judgments. And I suppose it could be a lesson for our current culture where everyone claims they're triggered. How about just, growing up like Athena's telling Telemachus to, and deal with the fact it's art, it's not real, although it can be highly instructive. Zeus is to blame. He deals to each and every labourer on this earth whatever doom he pleases. Why fault the bard if he sings the Argives' harsh fate? It's always the latest song, the one that echoes last in the listener's ears, that people praise the most. Courage, mother, harden your heart and listen. Odysseus was scarcely the only one, whose journey home was blotted out at Troy. Others, so many others, died there too. So, mother, go back to your quarters, tend to your own tasks, the distaff and the loom, and keep the women working hard as well. As for giving orders, men will see to that, but I most of all. I hold the reins of power in this house. Hang on, Telemachus, he really is going for it now, isn't he? So he's obviously been a bit of a shrinking violet, now he's really coming out. But it's also, if you remember the proem of the Odyssey, the very beginning summary, small, almost self-contained verses, Zeus is to blame, whereas Zeus has been blaming in the opening statement. He blames men for not taking the advice of the gods, whereas Telemachus is showing a bit of resistance here and arguing, and this goes against slightly what actually happens in the story. Whatever doom he pleases. That might have been true in the Iliad, but in the Odyssey, it does seem to be a bit more contractual, that if you obey and follow custom and tradition, then the gods will look after you in the Odyssey. Odysseus was scarcely the only one. It's interesting, Telemachus also shows his good character because he's considering other people. Because it's a very character-driven story, there is the risk that we just become obsessed what happened to Odysseus. And as we'll find out as the story goes along, he lost all his men. So, not just at the Battle of Troy, but also on the way home. So many people have died. Odysseus was scarcely the only one, whereas as his son, you could almost forgive him for only being concerned about Odysseus, but he isn't. And then he gives this order to his mother to go back. And like I say, that's ambivalent. He could just be being rude, or he could actually be putting on a bit of an act to protect her. And there's also the mention of the distaff and the loom. So we'll find out later. The loom, this constant using the loom. I think she says she's going to weave a death shroud for her elderly father. And every night she undoes the work she's done. So she tells the suitors, I can only marry one of you when I finish this task of the death shroud. But then every night she undoes it all, and that's her trick. So that's a reference to that. Astonished, she withdrew to her own room. She took to heart the clear good sense in what her son had said. Climbing up to the lofty chamber with her women, she fell to weeping for Odysseus, her beloved husband, till watchful Athena sealed her eyes with welcome sleep. But the suitors broke into uproar through the shadowed halls, all of them lifting prayers to lie beside her, share her bed. Until discreet Telemachus took command. You suitors who plague my mother, you insolent, overweening, for this evening let us dine and take our pleasure. No more shouting now. What a fine thing it is to listen to such a bard as we have here. The man sings like a god. So in both places I've emboldened there till watchful Athena sealed her eyes with welcome sleep. It's the constant intervention of gods in the actions of human beings and the protective role. So I'll talk in a second or later about Athena being the daemon or the protective spirit of the household of Odysseus. So she's even relatively minor domestic issues like Athena falling asleep, she's there to protect her. And then even the comparison, so Phemius the bard, the man sings like a god. So there's this constant interaction of human values and godly comparisons. But at first light, we all march forth to assembly. Take our seats so I can give my orders and say to you straight out, you must leave my palace. See to your feasting elsewhere. Devour your own possessions, house to house by turns. But if you decide the fare is better, richer here, destroying one man's goods and going scot-free, all right then, carve away. But I'll cry out to the everlasting gods in hopes that Zeus will pay you back with a vengeance. All of you destroyed in my house, while I go scot-free myself. So after previously having said he thought Zeus punished people a bit randomly, he's now depending upon the fact that as long as he goes to the assembly, as long as he gives people due warning, then Zeus will protect him from punishment. And just to flag up, at the very end of the book, there's been arguments that the final book, book 24, was tagged on a bit because everything's tied up in a neat bow and the gods describe how they're going to stop any vendettas, they're going to stop the families of the suitors retaliating, which strikes some commentators as a bit artificial. But it's all within, the idea is, you can see it here quite clearly, one of the main strands of the Odyssey is this idea of people who are forewarned who then still act badly, they suffer consequences, which in our day it would be nice to think that consequences could be reintroduced to life in various forms. So Telemachus declared, and they all bit their lips, amazed the prince could speak with so much daring. Eupithes' son, Antinous, broke their silence. Well, Telemachus, only the gods could teach you to sound so high and mighty. Such brave talk. I pray that Zeus will never make you king of Ithaca, though your father's crown is no doubt yours by birth. A couple of things to say. Antinous means, I think, hostile or minded against, so he's got a great name for quite a Mardy personality. I think Mardy is a Northern English word meaning, it's hard to explain actually, just Mardy, someone's Mardy if they're obstreperous or sulky, or it's a combination of various things, it's hard to explain. I spend most of my life being Mardy. The idea about king of Ithaca, I think the king is more of like a nobleman. There were like more than one king. So I don't know whether baron or earl or some other. It's aristocracy, but the king isn't necessarily the unilateral, all-powerful person that we think of. But cool-headed Telemachus countered firmly. Antinous, even though my words may offend you, I'd be happy... Oh, sorry, I missed that bit. Only the gods could teach you to sound so high and mighty. Again, the gods are interwoven. They're imbricated all the way through. Which is interesting because there will be, I'll be exploring it time and time again, the extent to which the gods are both separate yet also interwoven in mortal lives. And you could argue that contemporary philosophy, contemporary literature has never really escaped. It's the age-old aspect of the humanities, the relationship between mortal human beings and a concept of the transcendent, however that transcendent is thought of in different historical epochs. And what's interesting is in these Greek epics, the transcendent and the terrestrial are interwoven in such a complex way. I'm just thinking of Penelope's loom there, but it's a constant theme. So, but cool-headed Telemachus countered firmly, Antinous, even though my words may offend you, I'd be happy to take the crown if Zeus presents it. Again, only if the gods present it. Telemachus won't go against the gods. You think that nothing worse could befall a man. It's really not so bad to be a king. All at once your palace grows in wealth, your honours grow as well. But there are hosts of other Achaean princes, look, young and old, crowds of them on our island here, and any one of the lot might hold the throne. Now great Odysseus is dead. But I'll be the lord of my own house and servants, all that King Odysseus won for me by force. So now great Odysseus is dead. He knows because Athena, in the guise of Mentes, has told him she thinks he's still alive. He's now showing the cunning that his father has in spades that we'll see throughout the rest of the epic. And then there's the reminder King Odysseus won for me by force. So that human autonomy still plays a role. You can't just wait around for the gods to do things for you. And now Eurymachus, Polybus' son, stepped in. Surely this must lie in the gods' lap, Telemachus, which Achaean will lord it over sea-girt Ithaca. Do hold on to your own possessions, rule your house. God forbid that anyone tear your holdings from your hands while men still live in Ithaca. But about your guest, dear boy, I have some questions. Where does he come from? Where's his country, his birth, his father's old estates? Did he bring some news of your father, his return? Or did he come on business of his own? How he leapt to his feet and off he went. No waiting round for proper introductions, and no mean man, not by the looks of him, I'd say. And again, in the emboldened bit, surely this must lie in the god's lap. There's this constant tension and theme between what the gods ordain and what people need to step up to the plate and take of their own accord. And Telemachus is growing into manhood, and he's learning how to distinguish when to act and when just to obediently follow custom. Eurymachus, Telemachus answered shrewdly, clearly my father's journey home is lost forever. I no longer trust in rumours from the blue, nor bother with any prophecy, when mother calls some wizard into the house to ask him questions. As for the stranger, though, the man's an old family friend from Taphos, wise Achilles' son. He says his name is Mentes, lord of the Taphian men who love their oars. So he said, but deep in his mind he knew the immortal goddess. Now the suitors turned to dance and song, to the lovely beat and sway, waiting for dusk to come upon them there, and the dark night came upon them, lost in pleasure, finally to bed, each to his own house. So to the lovely beat and sway, the suitors are getting down to a bit of Barry White there. Telemachus, off to his bedroom, built in the fine courtyard, a commanding lofty room set well apart, retired too, his spirit swarming with misgivings. His devoted nurse attended him, bearing a glowing torch. Euryclea, the daughter of Ops, Paisanor's son. Laertes had paid a price for the woman years ago, still in the bloom of youth. He traded 20 oxen, honoured her on a par with his own loyal wife at home, but fearing the queen's anger, never shared her bed. She was his grandson's escort now and bore a torch, for she was one of all the maids who loved the prince the most. She nursed him as a baby, which will be relevant later on when she recognises Odysseus' scar. So there's also the description of Eurycleia, the fact she's being so loyal and being around for so long. So Laertes is the father of Odysseus, the grandfather of Telemachus. So Eurycleia, as I said later on, there's a key scene in which she recognises, as does Argos, the old dog of Odysseus. So this concept of continuity and the length of time he's been away. Book 19, I think it is, she recognises his scar. So the end of the book 1, he spread the doors of his snug, well-made room, sat down on the bed and pulled his soft shirt off, tossed it into the old woman's conscientious hands, and after folding it neatly, patting it smooth, she hung it up on a peg beside his corded bed, then padded from the bedroom, drawing the door shut with a silver hook, sliding the doorbell home with its rawhide strap. There, all night long, wrapped in a sheep's warm fleece, he weighed in his mind the course Athena charted. So again, it's described as the course Athena charted, but it's also his interior monologue, his interior thoughts. And it's this indivisibility. I mentioned the word imbrication before, or interpolation, whichever phrase you want to describe how interwoven, again to use the Penelope Loom notion, but this intermixing, this conflation of the mortal and the godly, the spiritual, is something we're going to go on to talk about now. So that's the end of book 1. And just to sum up some of these ideas, so arguably there are 3 distinct functions of Athena in that conversation. So she's prudence and wisdom, as opposed to just very angry from the Iliad. But I think it's the second one, the family daemon, goddess of the household, comes through the most. But it's a combination of 1 and 2. And then she's also a military goddess. So I should have emboldened 1 as well. So don't be distracted by only 2 being emboldened there, please. But also that the different types of knowledge or wisdom. So phronesis is what she embodies in this conversation. It's practical wisdom. It's navigating complex everyday realities. You could think of Ian McGilchrist and the left brain, right brain. So he argues in our modern society we're left brain dominated, which is the right hand. Most people are right-handed, and we tend to favour process, Keir Starmer. We favour science. We favour regularity. Whereas, according to McGilchrist, our brains are well, not just to him, but our brains are bicameral and 2-chambered. And McGilchrist provides loads of evidence to argue that what we should be doing is using both sides of the brain in combination, left side and right side. So phronesis is practical wisdom. And maybe in future I'll look at that, the Ian McGilchrist idea, looking at phronesis. This goes to my point about when you look at very contemporary discussions of neuroscience, philosophy of mind, cognitive linguistics, all these things. The Greeks had this notion of practical wisdom, which I think is McGilchrist's idea of the left brain and the left hemisphere and right hemisphere of the brain working in conjunction. And the idea is that the right-hand side of our brain, I think it is, I always get confused, but most people are right-handed, and that's the left-hand side of your brain controls that. And if I've got it right, apologies if my memory's awful, but it's the left-hand side, right-handed skills tends to dominate in a modern technical society. So techne here, technical skills. And Sophia would be abstract theoretical knowledge. whereas the right hand side of our brain, which controls the left hand, it's interesting that most disproportionate number of artists are left-handed. It's the more creative, it's the more strategic rather than tactical. So you could argue that this notion of phronesis, practical wisdom, is giving more credence to right-sided hemisphere ideas, and the idea that practical techne, practical wisdom, is something that it's just based. I'm sorry, I'm wittering, but it's basically phronesis isn't a million miles from what Ian McGilchrist argues late, in the 21st century. So over 2,500 years before you've got the Odyssey, some of these ideas, I just see the relevance of them. Now, this is the judgment of Paris that was referred to. So right at the beginning, I showed you from the Iliad the reason why Athena was so angry. And Hera and Athena are angry because Aphrodite is favoured by Paris. So this is Jacob Jourdain's golden apple of discord at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, 1633, also known as the Judgment of Paris. So it's it's a spirit of discord, is it Eris, who lobs the apple in, and then basically Paris is told he has to judge who's the fairest of them all. And it's a common theme in all these pictures that Aphrodite quite likes to market her wares. And I think we're in an era of body positivity here. So I won't use the R word, but the assault of Helen, this is Kaluthos of Lycopolis. And it's contemporary. It's not a million miles. It's later than, most likely, it's later than the Odyssey. But this is, and the Iliad. But this is the original. There was a Homer story about the Judgment of Paris, but it's referred to in other works, but there's no existing copies of it. So this is, I think, the only extant or existing verifiable reference to the Judgment of Paris, or the earliest. So, and to him, in his fear, wondrous Hermes, so Hermes has come down and told Paris, you have to judge. And to him, Paris, in his fear, wondrous Hermes spake thus, fling away thy milking pail, and leave thy fair flocks, and come hither, and give decision as judge of the goddesses of heaven. Come hither and decide, which is the more excellent beauty of face, and to the fairer give this apple as lovely fruit. So Paris, minding his own business, herding the flock, and down comes Hermes, the giant slayer, the messenger of the gods. And the idea is that he has to judge, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. And this is Peter Paul Rubens' depiction. This was between 1632 and 1635. And you can see on the left Athena's shield with the Gorgon Medusa. So he cried, and Paris bent a gentle eye and quietly essayed to judge the beauty of each. He looked at the light of their grey eyes, he looked on the neck arrayed with gold, he marked the bravery of each, the shape of the heel behind, yea, and the soles of their feet. Very thorough. But before he gave judgment, Athena took him smiling by the hand, and spake to Alexander thus. So I'm just showing you all this because this goes back to the very beginning, when in book 24 of the Iliad, there's just a very brief mention of the Judgment of Paris, which explained the anger of the goddesses. So I'm just giving you the full context. And then given everything we've seen before with Athena in the Odyssey, she's much more reasonable. She's much more evidence of prudence and the household daemon trying to guide judiciously, whereas this portrays her in a much more angry light. Come hither, son of Priam, leave the spouse of Zeus, and heed not Aphrodite, queen of the bridal bower, but praise thou Athena, who aids the prowess of men. They say that thou art a king and keepest the city of Troy. Come hither, and I will make thee the saviour of their city to men hard pressed, lest ever Enyo of grievous wrath weigh heavily upon thee. Hearken to me, and I will teach thee war and prowess. So the different goddesses are pitching their words, and they're trying to persuade Paris who he should say is the most beautiful. And I think Eris was the embodiment of strife and discord. She's the one who lobs in the apple. But I think Enyo being referred to here as the sister of war. And I think Homer at least uses them interchangeably. I quite like this one. I'm just showing you different versions. This is Gustav Pope, who was a British artist, but I think he was from an Austrian background. 1889, The Judgment of Paris. But there's looking quite dodgy in the background. Oh, Paris making his mind up. The ladies in this being much more demure. So cried Athena of many counsels, and white-armed Hera thus took up the tale. If thou wilt elect me and bestow on me the fruit of the fairer, I will make thee lord of all mine Asia. Scorn thou the works of battle. What has a king to do with war? A prince gives command both to the valiant and to the unwarlike. Not always are the squires of Athena foremost. Swift is the doom and death of the servants of Enyo. So Hera here is contradicting. Athena's offered him to make him more warlike. Hera here is saying something different. And now we get Aphrodite, who's really going to sell her, well, herself. This is one of the rare, this is Botticelli between, they reckon circa 1485 to 1488. And this is one of the very rare paintings where they've all got their clothes on. Such lordship did Hera, who hath the foremost throne, offer to bestow. But Cypris, Aphrodite, lifted up her deep-bosomed robe and bared her breast to the air and had no shame. Some things never change in our current climate. And lifting with her hand, I'm just thinking this is like Kim Kardashian come back. And lifting with her hands the honeyed girdle of the loves, she bared all her bosom, she's going further now, and heeded not her breasts. And we think OnlyFans is a modern innovation. And smilingly she thus spake to the herdsman, accept me and forget wars. Take my beauty and leave the sceptre and the land of Asia. I know not the works of battle. What has Aphrodite to do with shields? By beauty much more do women excel. In place of manly prowess, I will give thee a lovely bride, and instead of kingship, enter thou the bed of Helen. Like a daemon after Troy shall see thee a bridegroom. Not yet had she ceased speaking, and he gave her the splendid apple. Typical bloke. Beauty's offering. The great treasure of Aphrodite, who again, there's different words for Aphrodite. A plant of war and evil seed. So it just goes to show in the book 24 of the Iliad, there's just this throwaway line, but this is the whole background. And I think it's a lovely idea, a plant of war, this apple. And interestingly, if you think of the book of Genesis and the apple from the tree of knowledge, a plant of war and evil seed. So this is how it all starts. I quite like this, just to give you a bit of a novelty. This is The Judgment of Paris by G.A. Story from 1877. And it's quite funny. It's obviously put in a Victorian context. But this is just, you could call this painting the origins of a pervert. This little boy's got no chance, has he? Yes, I fear for his future. A peeping Tom stroke voyeur in the making. And I quite like this. It's a long, complicated story. The actual, where this comes from, it's the, Ukaleon is a palace built on Corfu. It was the Empress Elizabeth of Austria. Was it her son she lost? But there was a tragedy. And this villa palace on Corfu was built to try and cheer her up or give her an escape. And it shows the Aphrodite taunting Hera and Athena with the apple. So the voiceover to this would probably be something like, nah, 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 nah. I just think it's really funny. She's winding them up. And quite shamelessly, again, Toga seems to have slip off with the best possible taste all the time. So this is where I just want to finish off by looking at the daemon, the notion of the spirit, and how it relates to human emotion. And again, I'm not claiming the Greeks just merely projected. I'm suggesting that their concept of the interaction of the spiritual and the mortal was incredibly nuanced and, fascinating. So this is Plato, the Symposium, and it's Socrates is talking about a woman, Diotima, and he's describing using her to, and he's in dialogue, and he uses his previous dialogue with Diotima to try and prove through the dialogue what the nature of the daemon or what the nature of spirituality is. And the specific example they're using is love as an emotion, but arguably it could be applied to other emotions. For I spoke to her in much the same terms as Agathon addressed just now to me. So his other interlocutor is Agathon, saying love was a great god and was of beautiful things. And she, in other words, Diotima, refuted me with the very arguments I have brought against our young friend, showing that by my account the god was neither beautiful nor good. How do you mean, Diotima, said I? Is love then ugly and bad? Peace for shame, she replied. Or do you imagine that whatever is not beautiful must needs be ugly? So I hope I've made this clear, but it's the middle of the symposium. Socrates is having this chat with Agathon, and they're talking about the nature of love. And is it a godly thing? To what extent is it a pure spiritual experience? Like a direct experience of the gods. And Diotima introduces this quite nuanced, complicated. It's a very interesting approach to the concept of what spirituality might be. So just to recap, showing that by my account the god was neither beautiful nor good. How do you mean, Diotima, said I? Is love then ugly and bad? Peace for shame, she replied, or do you imagine that whatever is not beautiful must needs be ugly? So Diotima is introducing complexity. She's saying Something like love is not necessarily beautiful or ugly, that there's a middle ground. To be sure I do. And what is not skilled, ignorant? Have you not observed that there is something halfway between skill and ignorance? What is that? You know, of course, that to have correct opinion, if you can give no reason for it, is neither full knowledge, how can an unreasoned thing be knowledge, nor yet ignorance, for what hits on the truth cannot be ignorance. So correct opinion, I take it, is just in that position between understanding and ignorance. It's a fascinating discussion about, it's like a manifesto against black and white thinking, which the world would do a lot better at the moment if it paid more attention to this. Quite true, I said. Then do not compel what is not beautiful to be ugly, she said, or what is not good to be bad. Likewise of love, when you find yourself admitting that he is not good nor beautiful, do not therefore suppose he must be ugly and bad, but something betwixt the two. And what of the notion, I asked, to which everyone agrees, that he is a great God? Everyone? People who do not know, she rejoined, or those who know also? I mean everybody in the world. At this she laughed and said, But how, Socrates, can those agree that he is a great God who say he is no God at all? What persons are they, I asked. You are one, she replied, and I am another. How do you make that out, I said. Easily, said she. Tell me, do you not say that all gods are happy and beautiful? Or will you dare to deny that any god is beautiful and happy? Bless me, I exclaimed, not I. And do you not call those happy who possess good and beautiful things? Certainly I do. But you have admitted that love, from lack of good and beautiful things, desires these very things that he lacks. Yes, I have. How then can he be a god if he is devoid of things beautiful and good? By no means, it appears. So you see, she said, you are a person who does not consider love to be a god. What then, I asked, can love be? A mortal? Anything but that. Well, what? As I previously suggested, between a mortal and an immortal. And what is that, Diotima? A great spirit, Socrates, for the whole of the spiritual is between divine and mortal. Possessing what power, I asked? Interpreting and transporting human things to the gods and divine things to men, entreaties and sacrifices from below, and ordinances and requitals from above, being midway between, it makes each to supplement the other, so that the whole is combined in one. Through it are conveyed all divination and priestcraft concerning sacrifice and ritual and incantations, and all soothsaying and sorcery. So it's quite an interesting perspective on the actual concept of love as a notion of desire is neither godly nor mortal, it's somewhere in between. And that, I think, is what the epics and the myths portray. What contemporizes this weird, constant interference of these spiritual beings. You could argue there is a pure realm where the gods exist in their fullness and really don't give a monkeys about humankind. But insofar as human beings have some type of awareness of them, it's through these spirits, the realm of the spiritual, which is between the divine and the mortal. So it finishes with this section, God with man does not mingle, but the spiritual is the means of all society and converse of men with gods and of gods with men, whether waking or asleep. Whosoever has skill in these affairs is a spiritual man. To have it in other matters, as in common arts and crafts, is for the mechanical. Many and multifarious are these spirits, and one of them is love. So I like this definition. The spiritual is the means of all society, and converse of men with gods, and of gods with men, whether waking or asleep. So the spiritual is this mode of communication between the immortal and the mortal. So God with man does not mingle, but the manifestation is experienced through the spiritual. And then there's this idea that there are skill in these affairs is a spiritual one. People have different skill sets in modern parlance, as in common arts and crafts is for the mechanical. And you could argue our modern society has given itself over to the mechanical and the technological, and we've lost the Greek notion of finding a middle ground with the spiritual as well. But many and multifarious are these spirits, and one of them is love. So it's a way of understanding at least, and then there's a huge scholarly debate to be had. To what extent is Plato advancing his own interpretation of the notion of the gods implicit in Homer's epics? And I keep saying, but we'll look at the dialectic of enlightenment, Adorno and Horkheimer, and they link Homer's epic as having the first signs of what Plato and Aristotle and others would then develop into more abstract reasoning. And they argue that Western culture slowly and progressively left behind this middle ground that's being described in the symposium. But what's interesting is just to look at it, is to see how Plato was directly recognizing and commenting upon not pure abstract reason, but the notion of the spiritual as a combination of the mortal and the immortal, this concept of balance. Which again, to go back to the Ian McGilchrist idea, who advocates in all his work the need to balance right hemisphere and left hemisphere thinking. This is the symposium of 2,500 years ago saying pretty much the same thing. And then this is Socrates and the Apology, just to give you a final example. I have a divine or spiritual sign which Meletus has ridiculed in his deposition. This began when I was a child. It is a voice, and whenever it speaks, it turns me away from something I'm about to do, but it never encourages me to do anything. So this is Socrates. His concept of his own daemon is spirit, that we could think of as a conscience. So it turns me away from something I'm about to do, but it never proactively encourages him to do anything specifically. So at all previous times, my familiar prophetic power, my spiritual manifestation, this is later on, in the Apology. I think the previous paragraph was 32, and this one I think is 40. I apologise if I've got that wrong. At all previous times, my familiar prophetic power, my spiritual manifestation frequently opposed me, even in small matters, when I was about to do something wrong. But now that, as you can see for yourselves, I was faced with what one might think and what is generally thought to be the worst of evils, my divine sign has not opposed me, either when I left home at dawn or when I came into court, or at any time that I was about to say something during my speech. So this is Socrates speaking to save his own life, or in a certain sense refusing to, because he won't go against his conscience. So he's incredibly brave, but he's basically saying his daemon, his divine sign, he uses all these euphemisms, my spirit, my familiar prophetic power, my spiritual manifestation. Then he goes on to say my divine sign. Whether a clumsy word would be conscience, but this inner voice. And this is in future weeks what I want to explore, how it could be conceived of as spiritual, an element of the divine, a manifestation of the gods. In much more modern times, you'd think of it in terms of psychoanalysis, the superego, all these type of ways of thinking about this. But they're all here in this, I keep saying, but it's 2,500 years ago. It's amazing. Yet in other talks it often held me back in the middle of my speaking, but now it has opposed no word or deed of mine. What do I think is the reason for this? I will tell you. What has happened to me may well be a good thing, and those of us who believe death to be an evil are certainly mistaken. I have convincing proof of this, for it is impossible that my familiar sign did not oppose me if I was not about to do what was right. So again, this idea, my familiar sign, is another euphemism for his daemon, his spirit, his inner conscience, whatever phrase you want to use. And all of this was just by way of showing you how the intervention of Athena, different ways of thinking, that actually, yes, I pointed out there's an immediate threefold explanation. She's the goddess of war, she's the goddess of prudence, and she's also the household daemon or protectoress. But the way she also represents Telemachus's growing awareness that he needs to grow into a man, the way she represents his inner voice, all of these things are many layered, and they all exist within the epic and then were pursued further by people like Plato in the subsequent philosophy. And one thing that I'll address in future weeks, but it's always been a bugbear of mine, Plato gets labelled as someone who took the Greeks away from this balance of left brain, right brain, and everything that's been described about the way in which spirituality is a middle ground between mortality and immortality, between the spiritual world and the practical world. And yet, as you can see in that symposium and the Apology, and all the way through the Republic, and lots of his writings, he uses metaphorical technique, theatrical technique, and psychology. So at one point he describes in the Republic the way in which your personality is driven by a white horse and a black horse. And it's almost like language, Freudian language of the unconscious and the id and the ego. And all of this is contained in these Greek epics. And every time I see this image of the film, I just think, I don't think we're going to get this from the film. But anyway, remember, text before movie. And I hope you enjoyed that. Plenty more to come. All the very best. Take care. Bye.